The flowers scattered across the granite like broken promises, petals crushed under the polished Oxford of Richard Westbrook as he shoved the old man backward. Enough with this pathetic show, old-timer. Memorial Day is about celebration, not your guilt trips. The crowd of families and tourists froze, smartphones emerging like weapons, capturing the moment when dignity collided with arrogance in the shadow of the Riverside Memorial. The elderly veteran, his chest heavy with faded ribbons and tarnished medals, said nothing. He simply bent to retrieve his fallen cap, his weathered hands trembling not from age, but from something else entirely, something that made the younger mothers pull their children closer without understanding why. Westbrook straightened his designer tie, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent park. This memorial is prime real estate, folks. The Riverside Development Project will bring jobs, revenue, progress. We can't let sentiment hold back our city's future. He gestured dismissively at the bronze figures frozen in eternal vigilance. These statues aren't feeding anyone's families. The old man's fingers found the brim of his cap, but he didn't place it back on his silver hair. Instead, he looked up at Westbrook with eyes that had seen things no camera could capture, things that lived in the spaces between breaths, in the silence after explosions. Still, he said nothing. A police officer leaned against his Cruiser 30, yards away, arms crossed, watching, waiting. When a teenage boy stepped forward, fists clenched, the officer finally moved, toward the boy, not toward Westbrook. "Everything's under control here, son. Move along." The veteran's gaze shifted to the officer, then back to Westbrook. For a moment, something flickered across his features. Recognition, perhaps, or disappointment so deep it had no name. He turned and walked away, his gait steady despite his age, leaving behind the scattered flowers and the crowd's uncomfortable murmurs. "That's right, walk away," Westbrook called after him. "This isn't your war anymore, Grandpa. Let the living handle the living." The video hit social media within minutes. Riverside shame began trending within hours. The footage showed everything: Westbrook's shove, the scattered flowers, the old man's silent dignity. But what it couldn't show was the electricity in the air, the way the memorial itself seemed to shift in the twilight, as if the bronze soldiers were preparing to step down from their pedestals. By morning, the mayor's office had released a statement supporting the development project. "Mr. Westbrook represents progress and economic opportunity. We cannot allow outdated sentimentality to impede growth." The police chief echoed the sentiment, noting that no charges would be filed since the veteran had declined to press any. But something was already stirring. Dawn broke gray and cold on the second day, fog rolling in from the river like the ghosts of old battles. The first veteran arrived at 0600, a woman in her 70s wearing a perfectly pressed army uniform that no longer quite fit her frame. She placed a single white rose at the base of the memorial and stood at attention. By 0700, there were 12 of them. By 0800, 37. They came without fanfare, without signs or chants. They simply arrived, took their positions, and waited. The fog swirled around them as if nature itself was honoring their vigil. Richard Westbrook arrived at his office to find his assistant white-faced and stammering. "Sir, you need to see this. The memorial, there are people, lots of people." The view from his 20th floor window revealed a sight that made his coffee go cold in his hand. The memorial park was filling with figures in uniform, their ranks growing by the hour. They stood in formation, silent and still, their faces turned toward the morning sun. "Call security," Westbrook snapped. "Get them out of there. They're trespassing." But the security guards who arrived found no trespassers, only citizens exercising their right to peaceful assembly. The veterans had proper permits, obtained through channels that seemed to materialize overnight. When asked who had organized the gathering, they simply replied, "We organized ourselves." The media arrived next, drawn by the spectacle of hundreds of veterans standing vigil in the morning mist. but their questions met with polite silence. The veterans answered nothing beyond name, rank, and service record. When pressed about their purpose, they simply said they were honoring their fallen comrades. Westbrook's phone rang constantly. Investors, city council members, his own mother. The video had gone viral, spawning dozens of reaction videos and think pieces. Veterans stand joined Daesh on Riverside Shame as the hashtags multiplied across platforms. Cable news picked up the story, turning the small city memorial into a national conversation about respect, sacrifice, and the price of progress. By noon, the crowd had swelled to nearly 1,000. Veterans from 3 states had made the journey, some driving through the night. They brought folding chairs for the older ones, water bottles, and an unspoken code of conduct that kept the gathering peaceful, despite the tension crackling through the air. The old man from the day before was nowhere to be seen. Westbrook's attempts to control the narrative backfired spectacularly. His press conference, intended to reassert his position, became a disaster when a reporter asked if he'd served in the military. His answer, "I served my country by building its economy," became an instant meme, his face plastered alongside. Images of the silent veterans maintaining their vigil. The city council called an emergency session. Protesters gathered outside City Hall. But these weren't the veterans. They were civilians, ordinary citizens who had watched the video and felt something stir in their chests, something that had been sleeping for too long. The veterans remained at the memorial, their ranks now including Gold Star families and active duty service members who had driven from nearby bases. As the sun set on the second day, the memorial had become something else entirely. Not just a monument to the past, but a living testament to something that couldn't be bought, sold, or demolished. The bronze soldiers seemed to stand taller in the gathering darkness, their faces catching the last light as if they were preparing to speak. But they weren't the ones who would break the silence. The third day dawned clear and cold, the kind of morning that cuts through pretense and reveals things as they truly are. The veterans had maintained their vigil through the night, taking shifts, never leaving the memorial unguarded. Their numbers had grown again, over 1,500 now, a sea of uniforms and weathered faces that stretched across the park and into the surrounding streets. The media had set up a semi-permanent camp, satellite trucks and cameras capturing every moment of the unprecedented demonstration. But the story had evolved beyond a simple confrontation between progress and tradition. Something deeper was at work, something that made seasoned reporters lower their voices and approach with a reverence usually reserved for churches or cemeteries. At E-0900, a convoy of black SUVs arrived. The vehicles bore military plates, and the men and women who emerged wore dress uniforms adorned with ribbons and stars that commanded immediate respect. A brigadier general, a Navy admiral, and a collection of colonels and senior NCOs walked through the crowd of veterans who automatically parted to create a clear path to the memorial. The general, a weathered man whose bearing spoke of battles, fought in distant places, approached the center of the formation. His voice, when he spoke, carried clearly across the silent park. "I'm looking for someone," he said. "An old soldier who was dishonored here 2 days ago. We've come to set things right." The crowd stirred, but no one spoke. The general waited, his eyes scanning the faces of the veterans. Finally, a voice from the back called out, "He's not here, sir. Haven't seen him since it happened." The general nodded, his expression grim. "Then we wait." Richard Westbrook watched from his office window as the scene unfolded below. His lawyers had advised him to stay away, to let the situation resolve itself. The development project was effectively dead. No investor would touch it now, not with the national attention focused on the memorial. His career was likely over, his reputation in ruins, but he found himself unable to look away from the spectacle he had inadvertently created. At 10:30, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The veterans straightened, their formation tightening as if responding to an invisible command. Through the sea of uniforms, a figure approached. The old man from the confrontation, walking with the same steady gait that had carried him away in silence 2 days earlier. He wore a simple black suit, his medals pinned to his chest with military precision. His cap sat squarely on his silver hair, and his eyes held the same quiet dignity that had marked him from the beginning. But now there was something else in his bearing, something that made the crowd fall completely silent as he approached the memorial. The general stepped forward, his hand moving automatically to salute. "Sir," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I apologize for the delay. It took us time to verify your records." The old man stopped, his eyes meeting the general's. For the first time in 3 days, he spoke, his voice carrying clearly across. "The Silent Park. No need for formalities, General Morrison. We both know why you're here." Morrison nodded, his salute still held. Around them, the other military officials had come to attention, their own salutes crisp and unwavering. The veterans in the crowd followed suit, creating a sea of raised hands that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general said, his voice carrying across the park and into the television cameras that were broadcasting live to the nation. "I present Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Bradley, Congressional Medal of Honor, Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, Bronze, Star with V device for Valor." The crowd stirred, but Morrison wasn't finished. On March 15, 2017, in Mosul, Iraq, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley led a rescue operation that saved 113 civilians trapped in a collapsed building during an enemy artillery barrage. He personally carried 14 children to safety while under direct fire, sustaining multiple wounds in the process. His actions that day exemplified the highest traditions of military service and the values that this memorial represents. The general's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "Sir, on behalf of the United States military, the Department of Defense, and this grateful nation, I formally apologize for the disrespect shown to you, and, through you, to all who have served. Your sacrifice has not been forgotten." Bradley stood motionless for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the bronze soldiers of the memorial. When he finally spoke, his words were barely audible, but in the complete silence of the park, they carried to every ear. "I didn't come here for apologies, General. I came here for them." He gestured toward the memorial. "Tommy Rodriguez, KIA, March 16, 2017. Sarah Chen, KIA, March 18, 2017. James Washington, KIA, March 20, 2017. His voice grew stronger with each name. 47 others who didn't make it home. They're the ones who deserve this place, not me. The truth hit the crowd like a physical blow. The memorial wasn't just honoring generic fallen soldiers, it bore the names of Bradley's unit, the men and women who had died in the days following the rescue operation that had made him a hero. He had been coming here not as a veteran seeking recognition, but as a survivor carrying the weight of everyone he couldn't save. Morrison lowered his salute, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sir, with respect, you saved 113 people that day. The casualties that followed were not your fault." Bradley's laugh held no humor. "Tell that to their families, General. Tell that to the kids who ask why Daddy isn't coming home." He turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the silent park. "You want to honor the fallen? Then remember why they died. Not for monuments or photo opportunities, but for the idea that some things are worth more than money, more than comfort, more than our own lives." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the media seemed to sense that they were witnessing something that transcended their usual narratives of conflict and resolution. This wasn't about politics or development projects or even military service. This was about the weight of survival, the burden of carrying forward the memory of those who couldn't. Richard Westbrook had left his office and made his way to the park's edge, drawn by something he couldn't name. He watched as Bradley approached the memorial, placing his hand on the bronze nameplate that bore the names of his fallen comrades. The developer's throat tightened as he realized what he had stumbled into, what his casual cruelty had disrupted. "Bradley, turned back to the crowd one final time. I don't need your apologies or your salutes. I need you to remember that freedom isn't free, and honor isn't something you put on display. It's something you carry in your heart, something you live every day. He paused, his eyes finding Westbrook in the crowd. Even when no one's watching, especially then. The old soldier placed his cap back on his head, straightened his shoulders, and walked away from the memorial for the second time in 3 days. But this time, he wasn't walking away in silence and shame. He was walking away as a man who had said what needed to be said, who had honored his fallen comrades in the only way that mattered, by telling their truth. The crowd watched him go, and slowly, one by one, the veterans began to disperse. They had come to support an unknown old man who had been disrespected. They were leaving having witnessed something much deeper, a reminder of why they had served, why some had never come home, and why their sacrifice meant more than any monument could ever express. General Morrison was the last to leave, standing alone before the memorial as the sun set behind the bronze figures. He read each name carved into the stone, 47 souls who had died in the service of something greater than themselves. At the bottom of the list, in smaller letters, was an inscription that few had noticed before. Dedicated to the men and women of the 2nd Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, who gave their lives for their comrades and their country. No greater love. The memorial was never torn down. The development project died quietly, its investors pulling out as the story of Lieutenant Colonel Bradley spread across the nation. Richard Westbrook resigned from his position in disgrace, though he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand what he had witnessed in those 3 days at the memorial. But the real story wasn't about shame, or redemption, or even respect for veterans. It was about a man who had saved 113 lives in Iraq, who had carried the weight of 47 deaths for 7 years, and who had found in a small-town memorial the only place where he could speak their names aloud and remember why they had mattered. Thursday. Bronze soldiers stood their eternal watch, no longer just symbols of abstract sacrifice, but guardians of specific memories, specific faces, specific lives that had ended too soon in service of others. And somewhere in the city, an old man continued his own vigil, carrying the weight of survival and the responsibility of memory, knowing that some battles never really end. They just change shape, and we fight them one day at a time, one memory at a time, one act of honor at a time.